The desert highway was a long, straight line of gray under the huge blue sky. On one side, miles of empty scrubland. On the other, more of the same. The only sound for the last hour had been the hum of the Vi, Jeep's tires, and the whisper of the air conditioner fighting the dry heat. Elena pulled off the highway, the turn sudden and necessary. The gas station stood alone, a low building of faded white stone with 2 old pumps out front. A sign, bleached by the sun, promised cold drinks and clean restrooms. It was the kind of place you stopped at not because you wanted to, but because you had to. Her tank was near empty, and this was the only sign of life for 50 miles in any direction. She stepped out of the Jeep, the heat wrapping around her like a blanket. She wore simple clothes, dark jeans, a plain t-shirt, boots. Her hair was tied back. Nothing about her stood out, which was exactly how she liked it. She moved with a quiet purpose, slipping her credit card back into her wallet and using cash from her pocket instead. Old habits. She slid the money across the counter to the young man working there. He had a textbook open next to the register, something about biology. He looked up, smiled a tired smile, and gave her the change. Long drive? He asked, making conversation. Yeah, Elena said, her voice calm. Just passing through. She took her coffee, black, and walked back out to her Jeep. She leaned against the warm hood for a moment, letting her eyes wander. It was a thing she did, a habit from another life. You don't just see a place. You read it. The 2 old trucks parked on the side. The dust on their windows. The single streetlight that would come on later. The quiet. It was peaceful, but the kind of peaceful that felt thin, like it could tear. That's when she heard it. First a low rumble in the distance, like far-off thunder. Then it broke apart into the distinct, angry sound of motorcycle engines. Not 1 or 2, but a pack of them. They came over the rise of the highway like a swarm, a line of chrome and black leather. Turning as one into the gas station lot, the quiet was gone, shattered by the roar of engines and the crunch of gravel under heavy tires. There were 8, maybe 10 of them. They wore vests with patches on the back, a skull logo she didn't recognize and didn't care to. They parked in a way that blocked the pumps and the exit. This wasn't an accident. It was a statement. The men were loud, laughing with a mean edge, shoving each other. Their leader was a big man. He had a beard and eyes that didn't seem to smile, even when his mouth did. He walked into the store first, a few of his friends following like shadows. Elena stayed by her Jeep. Her coffee was forgotten, cooling in her hand. She watched through the big store window. She saw the leader his friends called him Hawk lean on the counter, talking to the young clerk. She saw the clerk's friendly smile freeze, then fade. She saw him shake his head, his hands coming up in a nervous, pleading gesture. Hawk's smile vanished. He said something sharp, and with a sweep of his arm, he knocked a whole display of candy bars and chips onto the floor. The crash was loud even through the glass. One of the other bikers laughed and kicked over a stand of motor oil. Bottles rolled across the floor. The clerk, his face now pale, was talking fast, pointing to a back office, probably explaining the owner wasn't here. Hawk just leaned closer, his voice a low threat Elena couldn't hear, but could easily understand. This was a shakedown. A simple, ugly demand for money from a kid who didn't have any to give. Elena's body was very still, but her mind was moving fast. She saw the angles, the numbers, the exits. Her training, a deep, instinctual part of her, she was trying to leave behind, laid it all out like a map. Asterisk threat assessment. Civilian in distress. Multiple hostiles. Disengage. Asterisk disengage. That was the smart move. The safe move. She was nobody's hero. She was just a woman on a road trip, wanting no trouble. She had a new life waiting, a quiet one. Getting involved here was the opposite of quiet. She made her decision. She turned, opened the door to her Jeep, and tossed the cold coffee onto the passenger seat. She would get in, start the engine, and drive away. Let them have their little moment of bullying. It wasn't her fight. She was about to slide into the driver's seat when the sound cut through the muffled chaos from the store. It was a sharp, sickening crack, the sound of a hard, open-handed slap followed immediately by a cry of pain. Elena stopped. Her hand was on the door frame. She didn't get in. She stood there, her back to the store, for 3 long seconds. The desert wind tugged at her shirt. She could still go. She should still go. Every rational part of her screamed to drive away. But another part, a part carved out by years of oath and duty and a simple, unbreakable understanding of right and wrong, wouldn't let her feet move. That cry wasn't just fear. It was the sound of someone being hurt. A kid who was just trying to study his biology book on a slow afternoon. She let out a slow breath, one she didn't know she was holding. She closed the Jeep's door without getting in. The lock clicked with a final sound. She turned around. Her face was calm, her eyes clear. The peaceful road trip was over. She walked back toward the gas station store, her boots making soft, deliberate sounds on the gravel. She didn't hurry. She just moved forward, toward the broken quiet, ready to face whatever came next. The bell above the door gave a soft, friendly jingle as Elena stepped back inside. It was a ridiculous sound for the scene it announced. The air in the store felt thick and hot, smelling of stale coffee and the sharp scent of spilled motor oil. All movement stopped. The 2 bikers by the knocked-over snack rack turned. The big one near the coolers, who had been grabbing beers without paying, paused. Hawk stood by the counter, his hand still raised near the face of the young clerk. The clerk's cheek was a bright, angry red, and his eyes were wide, blinking back tears of shock and pain. He looked at Elena, a flicker of confused hope in his gaze. Quickly swallowed by fear, Hawk slowly lowered his hand. His cold eyes looked Elena up and down, a slow, dismissive sweep. He saw a woman alone, not very big, dressed simply. His mouth twisted into something that wasn't a smile. "Store's closed, sweetheart," he said, his voice a low gravel. "Private party. Turn that cute little behind around and go find another soda pop." Elena didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the space between Hawk and the clerk, a calm, neutral spot on the scuffed linoleum floor. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady and quiet, like she was commenting on the weather. "He's paid," she said, giving a small nod toward the clerk. "You've made your point. Time for you all to go." For a second, there was just silence. Then one of the bikers by the snacks, a man with a thick neck and no chin, snorted a laugh. Hawk didn't laugh. His eyes narrowed. This wasn't in his script. People were supposed to be scared. They were supposed to cry, or beg, or run. They weren't supposed to stand there and calmly tell him to leave. "I don't think you heard me," Hawk said, taking one slow step away from the counter. "The adults are talking here. This is club business. Now you can walk out that door, or my friends can carry you out." As he said it, the 2 bikers near the door moved. They fanned out, not rushing, but closing the space between them and Elena. They were big men, used to their size alone being enough to make people back down. The one on the left, with a graying beard, reached out a meaty hand to grab her upper arm. "Come on, lady," he grumbled. "Don't make this." He never finished the sentence. Elena didn't pull away. Instead, she moved into the grab. As his fingers closed around her arm, her own hand shot up, not to pull his off, but to clamp over the top of his hand, locking it in place. At the same time, she stepped forward and pivoted, her body becoming a lever. She drove her other elbow into the soft spot just under his shoulder. It wasn't a wild punch. It was a sharp, precise jab. The man's eyes bulged. A grunt of surprise and pain exploded from his lips. The nerve cluster she'd hit screamed, and his entire arm went numb and useless. His grip went slack. Still holding his hand locked, Elena used his own forward momentum, twisting her hips and pulling down. He stumbled past her, off balance, and crashed shoulder first into a metal shelf of beef jerky, sending packages flying. He slid to the floor, clutching his dead arm, moaning that it had taken 2 seconds. The room froze again. A second biker stared, his brain catching up to what his eyes just saw. Anger replaced confusion. "You bitch!" He growled and lunged, swinging a wide, heavy fist aimed at her head. Elena didn't block the punch. She deflected it. Her forearm brushed the inside of his wrist as it came in, just enough to push the huge fist an inch off its path. It whistled past her ear. His body was now wide open, his side exposed. She didn't waste the chance. Her knee came up, hard and fast, driving into his thigh. It wasn't the crippling blow she could have delivered, but it was enough. His leg buckled. As he stumbled, she grabbed the back of his leather vest with both hands, yanked him forward to keep him falling, and then shoved him, sending him crashing into the rack of snacks his friend had been standing by earlier. Chips and pretzel bags exploded into the air. He landed in a heap on top of the crumpled display. Winded and dazed, the store was suddenly very quiet, except for the low groan of the first man on the floor and the hum of the drink coolers. Elena stood near the door, her breathing even. She hadn't moved more than 5 feet from where she entered. She looked at Hawk, who was now standing fully away from the counter, his back rigid. The playful cruelty was gone from his face, replaced by a cold, hard fury. The man by the coolers had let the beers drop and was now standing ready, his hands curled into fists. The clerk had pressed himself against the wall behind the counter, a statue of fear. Hawk's gaze flicked to his 2 men on the ground, one useless, one struggling to get up. He looked back at Elena, seeing her differently now. The calm wasn't just an act. The way she moved. It was too clean, too efficient. This wasn't a bar fight. This was something else. Slowly, deliberately, Hawk reached to his belt. The metal of a large folding knife caught the fluorescent light as he opened it with a smooth, practiced flick of his wrist. The blade looked mean and sharp. "Okay," Hawk said, the word a low whisper that filled the quiet room. "Okay, so you know a few tricks." He took a step forward, the knife held low at his side. "But a trick ain't gonna stop this." Elena didn't speak. She didn't look at the knife. She kept her eyes on Hawk's. Her own hands were open at her sides, relaxed. She shifted her stance, just slightly. It wasn't a boxing stance. It was balanced, ready to move in any direction. She gave a quick, sharp glance to the clerk behind the counter, her eyes telling him one clear thing. Asterisk, get down. Stay down. Asterisk outside, through the big window, she could see the other bikers gathered, their faces pressed to the glass. They were no longer laughing. They were watching, waiting for a signal. The world had shrunk to this small, messy store. The line was drawn. The fight was here, and there was no walking away from it now. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The only sounds were the hum of the coolers and the ragged breath of the man trying to stand up in the mess of chips. Hawk held the knife loosely, his eyes locked on Elena. The blade was a promise of pain, a tool meant to change the rules of the fight, but Elena's rules were different. In her world, a confined space with obstacles wasn't a trap. It was a toolkit. Hawk lunged. It wasn't a wild stab. It was a fast, forward thrust aimed to kill the fight quickly. Elena didn't back up toward the door where his friends waited. Instead, she sidestepped toward the center of the store, putting a tall rack of car air fresheners and motor oil between them. He came around the rack, slashing sideways. The blade whistled past, inches from her ribs. She moved again, not away from him, but at an angle, drawing him deeper into the aisle. She needed space from the knife, but she also needed to control where he was. The other biker, the one who had dropped the beers, saw his chance. He roared and charged down the parallel aisle, aiming to grab her from the side. Elena saw him coming in her peripheral vision. She didn't turn to face him. As he reached for her, she grabbed the nearest shelf, a flimsy metal thing holding bags of charcoal for roadside grills, and yanked it toward her. It wasn't heavy, but it was unexpected. The whole unit tilted, and bags of charcoal tumbled out, crashing to the floor right at the charging man's feet. He tried to jump, but his boot came down on a rolling bag. His feet went out from under him. He landed hard on his back on the linoleum, the air knocked out of him with a loud whoosh. Hawk was smarter. He didn't charge. He came forward steadily, using the shelves as cover, trying to corner her near the back coolers. He was forcing her toward a dead end. Elena backed up, her eyes scanning. She reached the end of the aisle, her back nearly to the glass doors of the drink coolers. Hawk smiled, a thin, cruel line. He thought he had her. He feinted high with the knife, and then swung low, aiming for her leg. Elena didn't try to block the metal. Instead, she hopped back, her shoulder brushing against a tall red metal fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. Her hand found the pin and yanked it out in one smooth motion dot as Hawk recovered from his swing. She lifted the heavy cylinder, pointed the hose away from her, and squeezed the lever. A thick white cloud of chemical powder exploded into the space between them. It wasn't like in the movies. It was a loud, hissing roar that filled the air with a choking, blinding fog. Hawk disappeared behind the white cloud, coughing and staggering back, his knife swing cutting uselessly through the dust. Elena moved. She wasn't fleeing. She was using the cover. She dropped the extinguisher, the last of its contents hissing out, and circled to the side, her shirt pulled up over her nose and mouth. She came around the cloud near the front of the store. The first man she had put down, the one with the dead arm, was finally getting to his knees, using a shelf to pull himself up. He didn't see her coming. She didn't hit him. As he rose, she hooked her foot behind his ankle and shoved his shoulder. He went down again, this time staying down, more confused than hurt. The white cloud began to settle, coating everything in a fine, pale powder. It looked like a bizarre winter had hit the desert gas station. Hawk emerged, wiping at his eyes, his face a mask of white rage. He blinked, trying to clear his vision. He saw Elena standing near the register. She was just watching him, waiting. "You think you're clever?" He spat, his voice hoarse from the powder. "You think this is a game?" He was furious, but there was a new wariness there, too. She wasn't fighting to win a fight. She was dismantling them, piece by piece, using the whole store against them. He didn't lunge this time. He called out, his voice rough. "Kyle, get the kid." The man who had slipped on the charcoal was back on his feet, red-faced and furious. He heard his leader. Instead of going for Elena, he turned and stumbled toward the counter, where the young clerk was still pressed against the wall, frozen in fear. The clerk's eyes went wide as the big man reached over the counter for him. He tried to duck, but the biker was too fast. A huge hand grabbed the front of his shirt and yanked him forward. The clerk cried out, his hands scrabbling at the man's wrist. The biker, Kyle, didn't have a knife, but he had something else. In his other hand, he held the jagged, broken neck of a beer bottle he'd picked up from the floor. He pressed the sharp, glittering edges against the side of the clerk's throat. "Move!" Kyle shouted at Elena, his voice tight with pain and anger. "You take one more step, and I open him up right here. I swear I will." Everything stopped. The fight went out of the room, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. Hawk stood near the settling cloud of powder, breathing heavily, a grim smile finally returning to his lips. He had lost men to this woman's tricks, but now he had the only thing that mattered: control. Elena stood perfectly still. Her hands, which had been ready, slowly came up to her sides, open and empty. Her eyes left Hawk and went to the clerk. The young man was trembling, his face as white as the powder on the floor. A single trickle of blood appeared where the point of the glass pressed into his skin. His eyes were locked on Elena's, filled with a silent, desperate plea. Hawk took a slow, victorious step forward, the knife still in his hand. "See?" he said, his voice quiet now, almost conversational. "All that fancy stuff? And for what? Now you're going to drop to your knees. You're going to put your hands on your head. And you're going to come with us nice and quiet. Or this kid's last biology lesson is going to be about how fast a man can bleed out." The clerk made a small, choked sound. Elena didn't look at Hawk. She kept her gaze on the clerk. Her face showed no fear, no panic. It was calm, like the surface of a deep, still lake. She was thinking, calculating, but her eyes told the clerk a different story. They were steady, and in them was a simple, unspoken message. Asterisk, don't move. Trust me. Asterisk outside. The other bikers were at the windows, watching the standoff. Inside, the store was a ruined, powdered mess, holding its breath. The only thing sharper than the broken glass at the clerk's throat was the silence, waiting to be broken. The silence in the store was absolute. It was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on everything. You could hear the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights, the shuddering breath of the terrified clerk, the low groan of the man still on the floor near the jerky. Alana kept her hands up, her palms open. She didn't look at the knife in Hawk's hand or the broken bottle at the clerk's throat. She looked at the clerk's eyes. They were wide, pleading, swimming with tears of pure fear. But she held his gaze steady and calm, trying to pour every ounce of reassurance she had into that look. "Don't fight him. Wait. Last chance," Hawk said, taking another step closer. The white powder from the fire extinguisher dusted his boots like strange snow. "On your knees? Now." Elena's voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet. It wasn't loud or threatening. It was just a clear statement in the thick air. She didn't speak to the man with the bottle. She spoke to Hawk, her eyes finally sliding to meet his. "You have one chance to walk away," she said. Her tone was matter-of-fact, like she was telling him his car door was open. "The police are already called. They'll be here soon." Hawk's smirk faltered for a second, just a flicker of doubt. The clerk had been behind the counter the whole time. Could he have? Hawk glanced at the clerk. The young man's face, pale and sweating, gave nothing away. The biker holding him, Kyle, tightened his grip, making the clerk gasp. He didn't call nobody. Kyle snarled, but the seed was planted. Hawk's eyes darted to the silent, black phone behind the counter, to the small, red button of a silent alarm, maybe hidden underneath the register's edge. He didn't know. Uncertainty was a weakness, and Alana had just handed him a big one. "That changes nothing," Hawk growled, but his voice had lost a little of its sure power. "Cops are 20 minutes out. That's more than enough time." He raised his knife, pointing it at Elena. "You think I'm playing? On your knees." Elena moved her head, just a fraction. A tiny, almost invisible nod directed at the clerk. At the same time, she spoke again, her voice slightly louder, commanding Hawk's full attention. "Your club," she said, her eyes locked on his. "The Iron Skulls, a half-hour from here, on the state line. The clubhouse is a blue warehouse next to the old tire yard." Hawk's face went blank with shock. How did this woman, this stranger just passing through, know that? His focus, which had been split between her and the hostage, now snapped entirely onto her. The information was a psychological slap, more jarring than a physical one. It made her dangerous in a new way. It meant she wasn't just some random tough customer dot in that exact second. The clerk moved. He didn't try to fight the big man holding him. He didn't try to grab the bottle. He did something simple and desperate. He let his knees buckle, like all the strength had left his body. He was a dead weight, suddenly slipping downward. The biker Kyle was caught off guard. He was focused on Elena, on his leader's conversation. He was strong, but he was holding the kid up. When the clerk went limp, Kyle's arm was jerked down by the sudden weight. The jagged bottle, pressed against the clerk's neck, tore a shallow scratch as it was dragged down. But it lost its deadly position. That was the only opening Elena needed. She didn't go for Kyle. She didn't try to save the clerk directly. That's what they expected. That's what would have gotten the kid hurt. Instead, she exploded forward, not toward the hostage, but straight at Hawk. He was still reeling from what she had said, his knife not quite ready. He saw her coming and swung the blade in a wild horizontal arc to keep her back. Elena didn't try to dodge it. She moved inside the arc. As his arm came across, she caught his wrist with both of her hands, one on top, one underneath, before the knife could build any speed. She didn't try to stop the muscle. She guided it, using his own momentum, turning her body and pulling his arm straight out like a lever. There was a sharp, sickening pop from his shoulder. Hawk screamed, a raw sound of agony. His fingers sprang open, and the knife clattered to the powdered floor in one continuous motion. Elena spun behind him, her arms snaking around his neck and head. It wasn't a choke. It was a control hold. She had his head locked under her arm, her other hand bracing his back. He was taller and heavier, but with his shoulder dislocated, he was just a giant in blinding pain. She applied pressure, not to his airway, but in a way that made moving his head even a little an exercise in pure torture. "Tell him to drop IT," she yelled, her voice sharp and clear, right in Hawk's ear. Kyle had recovered, yanking the clerk back to his feet. The bottle was still in his hand, now pointed shakily at Elena, but he was confused. His leader, the toughest man he knew, was bent over, helpless, crying out in pain, controlled by this woman. "Let him go," Kyle shouted, but the command had no power. "Tell him," Elena hissed, increasing the pressure just a bit. Hawk cried out again. "Drop it, Kyle." Hawk gasped, the words squeezed out of him. "Just drop it." Kyle hesitated, his face a storm of anger and confusion. "Now." Hawk screamed, the sound full of humiliation and pain. The bottle fell from Kyle's fingers, shattering on the linoleum with a final ringing crash. He let go of the clerk, shoving him away. The young man stumbled, then scrambled on his hands and knees behind the counter again, clutching at the shallow cut on his neck, breathing in ragged, sobbing gulps. Elena didn't loosen her hold. She shifted her weight, keeping Hawk bent and off balance. She looked past him at Kyle, and at the other biker, now getting slowly to his feet. "All of you," she said, her voice cold and even. "Against the front window. Sit down. Hands where I can see them." They looked at Hawk, twisted in her grip, his face contorted. He gave a tiny, defeated jerk of his head. Slowly, moving like men in a dream, the two able-bodied bikers walked to the big front window. They slid down to sit on the floor, their backs against the glass. Outside, Their friends stared in, their faces pressed to the window, looking stunned and leaderless. Nobody moved to come in. In the distance, faint but growing clearer every second, was a new sound. It wasn't the roar of motorcycles, it was the high, thin wail of sirens. The sirens grew from a thin whine to a full-throated wail, and then cut off abruptly in the gas station lot. Red and blue lights flashed through the big window, painting the white-powdered mess inside in swirling colors. Elena released her hold on Hawk. He slumped to his knees, cradling his dislocated arm, his head hanging low. The fight was completely gone from him, replaced by a dull, pained shame. She took 2 steps back, putting space between herself and everyone else. The front door burst open and 2 state troopers entered, hands on their holsters. They stopped short, taking in the scene. The overturned racks, the spilled charcoal, the fine white dust covering everything. The 3 bikers sitting against the window, and their leader on his knees in the middle of the floor. And then there was Elena, standing calm and still near the counter, her clothes dusty, but her expression clear. The older of the 2 troopers, a man with a lined face and sharp eyes, scanned the room. His gaze lingered on the broken bottle, on the knife on the floor, and on the young clerk, who was now peeking over the counter, a wad of paper towels pressed to his neck. "Everybody just stay right where you are," the trooper said, his voice calm but firm. His partner moved to cover the room, his eyes watching the bikers by the window. It took about 20 minutes for the scene to settle into a strange kind of order. More police cars arrived. The bikers from outside were rounded up and made to sit on the hot asphalt. Ambulance attendants checked on the clerk, cleaning the shallow cut on his neck and declaring him okay, just shaken up. They put Hawk's arm in a sling and helped him to his feet before a trooper led him away in handcuffs. The older trooper, his badge reading Bennett, took statements. He listened to the clerk, whose words tumbled out in a rush of fear and relief. He listened to the bikers, who mumbled stories about just having a disagreement that got out of hand. Finally, he walked over to Elena. She was leaning against her Jeep, sipping from a bottle of water one of the ambulance workers had given her. The desert sun was beginning to dip low, casting long shadows across the lot. "You want to tell me your side of it?" Trooper Bennett asked. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes weren't accusing either. They were just taking her in. Elena gave a short, simple version. She was driving through. She stopped for gas. She saw the men harassing the clerk, then assaulting him. She intervened. It was self-defense and defense of another. Her words were clean, factual, with no emotion. She didn't mention the fire extinguisher trick by name. Just said she created a distraction. She didn't describe the holds or the strikes. Just said she restrained them until they stopped. Bennett listened, nodding slowly. He glanced back at the destroyed store. "You restrained them," he repeated, a faint trace of something, maybe respect, maybe disbelief in his voice. "You got a military ID on you?" She hesitated for only a second, then nodded. She reached into her Jeep, pulled out her wallet, and handed him a card. It was a veteran's ID. He looked at it, then looked back at her face. He saw the quiet discipline in her eyes, the way she held herself even now. He handed the card back. "Seal, huh?" he said quietly, so only she could hear. She didn't confirm or deny it. She just met his gaze. He looked out at the bikers being loaded into the backs of police cars. He looked at the clerk, who was now talking animatedly to another officer, pointing at Elena with grateful eyes. Bennett let out a long breath. "You planning on sticking around?" "There'll be reports, maybe a court date." Elena shook her head. "I was just passing through. I have a new job. I start soon." He watched her for another long moment, then gave a single slow nod. All right, he said. I've got the clerk's statement. I've got your contact. We know where to find this bunch. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes the best thing a person passing through can do is keep passing through. You understand? She understood perfectly. He was giving her an out, a way to avoid the months of hassle, the paperwork, the spotlight she had driven 2,000 miles to avoid. I understand, she said. Good, he said. He almost offered a hand to shake, but stopped himself. He just gave her that same nod. Drive safe. He walked back toward the chaos of the gas station, already barking an order to someone about getting a tow truck for the motorcycles. Elena got into her Jeep. The interior was hot from the sun. She put the key in the ignition, but didn't start it right away. She looked in the rearview mirror. The clerk was standing by the police cars. He caught her eye. He didn't wave or smile. He just placed a hand over his heart, held it there for a second, and gave a small, solemn nod. It was a thank you that went beyond words. She gave him a small, almost invisible nod in return. Then she looked past him at the gas station, the broken window where a biker had been thrown against it, the door with the cheerful bell. It was just a place on a long road. It wasn't her home. It wasn't her fight. But for a little while, it had been her responsibility. She started the engine. The familiar sound felt good. She pulled out of the lot onto the empty highway. The sun was a fiery orange ball sitting on the edge of the world, painting the sky in colors of purple and gold. She rolled the window down. The desert air rushed in, clean and dry, washing away the last smells of powder and spilled coffee. Her hands were steady on the wheel. She felt tired, but not the bad kind of tired. It was the tired you feel after doing something difficult but necessary. She hadn't wanted a fight, but she hadn't run from one either. The skills she carried, the person her past had made her, they weren't ghosts to outrun. They were tools. And sometimes the right thing to do with a tool is to use it to help someone. The gas station shrank to a speck in her mirror, then disappeared behind a rise in the road. Ahead of her, the highway stretched out, a long gray line leading into the gathering dusk. She didn't know what waited for her at the end of it. A new town, a new life, a chance to be someone else. But as she drove into the sunset, she felt a little more at peace with the person she already was. The road was still open, and for the first time in a long time, she felt ready for whatever lay on it.